And in our final session, we're going to be looking at the new art of collecting and the convergence of luxury art and culture with 3 leading voices. So please let me welcome to the stage Anthea Peers, President EMEA for Christie's, Eshun, writer, curator and broadcaster, and please welcome back Katy Wickremesinghe, who's joined us many times before, cultural commentator and founder of KTW and the Wick. So I'm going to hand over to you, Katy, for what will be a brilliant.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Should we go in the middle, Ekow?
Sure.
You go in the middle. Hi everyone, great to see you, and I can imagine you're all probably a bit tired and ready for a drink at the end of the day, so we're going to make this one as dynamic as we can. Thank you, Charlotte, so much for the very kind introduction. It's a real privilege to be here with you for another year discussing cultural conversations at Walpole. So art and luxury, it's becoming more and more of a vital conversation. We're seeing these worlds and spheres coming together, whether this be artists working with brands, artistic institutions collaborating with luxury houses, or gallery interventions becoming more and more experiential. So as someone whose work places me directly at a touch point and at the heart of many of these conversations, I get the privilege to be at the bridge between art market players, businesses, creators, curators, artists. And I'm both fascinated and really excited about the old walls falling and new conversations starting to come about, many of which I've had a privilege to work on. So I'm thrilled today to be joined by 2 incredible experts in their fields. And whilst they're both from the art world, they're both from very different areas in the art world. We have Anthea Peers and Ekow to talk to us a little bit more. You both have so much experience. And Anthea, I wanted to start with you. You've worked with Christie's Auction House for nearly 2 decades. And for those who are less familiar with the machinations of an auction house, I'm sure everyone here will have been to an auction house and visited events there. But obviously Christie's was founded in 1766 in London by James Christie. And over the time that you've worked there, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about your role, how it's evolved, the conversations today, as well as touching on collecting, how your role touches on collectors and new modes of collecting behaviour.
Thank you so much. It would be a pleasure. It's such a pleasure to be having this conversation with 2 members of the arts ecosystem. So indeed, I have been at Christie's for really quite a profane amount of time now, and I almost can't even think about it. But indeed, 17 years ago, I started as a PA, and now I am president of Europe and the Middle East. You've all heard about the auctions that we hold. What actually we do is we connect collectors with great works of art. Now, those great works of art can be anything from the ancient period right through to the hottest contemporary artist of now. And along the way, we touch on jewelry, watches, dinosaurs, meteorites, antique French furniture, and a whole number of other wonderful categories. We've been doing that indeed for 250 years. And in fact, we've been in our office in St. James for 250 years, which is something we hold very, very close. My job is to establish what we're going to do for the next 250 years. How does our heritage entwine with the innovations of now? Now, you may have heard about some of the great auction records we've achieved, some of which are going to be flipping up on the screen as we go. But in truth, what we really do is something perhaps less visible. And I think an example that really sums it up for me is one of the images that you may see is a beautiful work by Banksy called Game Changer. And in it, a little boy has thrown aside his dolls of superheroes and he's holding a nurse. Now, Banksy himself sold that with us during the pandemic. It was sold, the estimate was £2.5 to £3.5 million. It sold for £16 million, and all of that money went to the NHS. And indeed, the buyer himself, instead of keeping the painting, he donated it to Great Ormond Street, where you can visit it any time. So as you can see, if you look at the future of Christie's, it's going to be about so much more than just the numbers. For us, we really want to lead on responsible culture. I loved earlier, someone mentioned about the catwalks of fashion. Well, our catwalk is our auctions. So for our major auctions, we curate for diversity. We ensure that there is strict gender parity. It's not difficult because the art world wants young, contemporary, and very underrepresented artists. But also our auctioneers. It used to be a very male-dominated activity, and now our auctioneers are strictly 50% gender.
And Ekow, I think in terms of talking about creating culture, you in your role as obviously are curating and curating culture quite literally. And I wanted to touch on this term, curator. I know that many of you will have worked with brands and you'll be in meetings saying, should we curate this? Should we curate that? Should we get a curated menu, playlist? How are we going to do and build this? And really, I just wanted to touch on the actual literal meaning of the term. Is it a self-given term? Can luxury brands use this term? Is it right that they use it? So tell us quite literally, what is the role of a curator in the context of which we're talking today?
I mean, yeah, look, anyone can use the term curator, and that's fine. There's no prohibition around that. But it's really what you do with it that counts. So as a curator, I have an exhibition right now that's on at the National Portrait Gallery. In fact, we can see an image from the exhibition right now. It's called The Time Is Always Now. This is a show that took 5 years to produce. There's a number of things you're trying to play with at the same time. You're trying to think about aesthetics, trying to think about what looks good. That's the thing that attracts people when they come in. And in a way, that's the more straightforward part about curating anything. Beyond that, though, it's really about context. And then it's actually about the stuff that's hard to put into words, which is about tone, which is about feeling, which is about engagement, which is about connection. It's the question, how do you create, how do you curate a space or a set or a position of encounter which brings people closer to the work involved in that and brings people ultimately in connection with themselves and with each other, which is really what artworks do most successfully. They allow us to look into ourselves, to look at the world around us, to ask questions about that world, maybe to find or discover something about ourselves or how we see the world that we hadn't necessarily anticipated before. And with an exhibition, you're trying to create the circumstances where that experience can resolve and deliver and make itself most clear and most profound.
Mm-hmm. And I think there's something so important about the role of a curator in terms of expertise, in terms of knowledge, in terms of academic capability and access. And I say this having come from a decade of global brand work and being very central in the art market now, is there is something that's directly linked. And I think it's important for everyone here, if you're looking at exhibitions in context of the work that you're doing, working with a curator doesn't only offer up the knowledge base, but it also by proxy, offers up an access point. So you are delivering a much richer, deeper level of content. And I wanted to touch on the fact, Ekow, that you have seamlessly worked in the last 2 years on some of the biggest, most incredible exhibitions, but you've really kind of balanced this juxtaposition of the institutional museum world. So please do go and see the National Portrait Gallery if you haven't. It's one of the most incredible exhibitions. But you have also worked in the global luxury space. I know this because I also have worked with him in some of these areas. And I'd like him to talk about one of these projects, actually, because it was very seamlessly done to the point where it had curatorial applause and was done in a way which I believe the most important word talking about curation is integrity. So do you want to talk a bit about that project?
I mean, I think, look, we'd all agree as a first place that integrity is pretty much everything, because it's not just about personal integrity, professional, but it's also when you're dealing with artists as well. You're working with their lives and their livelihoods. So I place a real store on respecting the work and engaging with audiences on that basis. So in fact, we worked together on a project for Claridge's Art Space. It was an exhibition called Like Paradise, which took place last year at Claridge's Art Space. Claridge's Art Space, really great space kind of around the back, is that the right?
Yeah, it's in Brits Muse, a John Pawson design space.
John Pawson designed kind of custom-built art space. It's kind of gorgeous, open-plan space. So we did an exhibition in there. It was a group exhibition of younger artists from diverse backgrounds called Like Paradise. I mean, I always think it's super interesting to try and... I'm quite interested in how you can work with brands and create something that everyone wins from. And by that, I mean you have integrity at the core of it, but you also then put on a great experience in terms of an exhibition that has the surprise, the delight, the anticipation, the discovery that every exhibition should have. You create an experience. That's not antithetical to brands. I mean, I used to work in magazines. I used to work in men's lifestyle magazines.
Yeah.
So I'm quite used to understanding really the demands and the necessities that brands quite rightly have.
It's worth mentioning Ekow was the first black editor, right, of Arena magazine. And I think in this context of which we're talking today, publishing and content making, which we'll come on to, is such a vital part of this story. But understanding your narrative, how you're weaving these narratives in, is absolutely key. And talking about some of the storytelling behind business, Anthea, you will have seen a real shift from this idea of the auction house as a transactional model where people are going for pure transactional art market purchase into something that is becoming, I would say, sharing a lot more values with the luxury market. What are some of those values that are starting to be shared? Experience, obviously, is one of them.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, thank you. And it's fascinating to me. An enormous shift happened in the last few years where suddenly arts organisations were starting to reach out and work together, and there was a collective understanding that we're stronger together. In our case, particularly, that's mirrored by the new buyers. The new generation that is coming in is incredibly powerful and is very different from the generations that have come before. And they lead with their values, and they look to you for their values. That's both the new bidders and buyers, but it's also the heirs, it's the owners of the great collections. The first thing they do is look up your sustainability credentials. We leaned heavily into that in 2012. We announced our sustainability strategy, but we're also looking forward to DE&I, which was discussed earlier. It's absolutely fundamental for this buyer group. So therefore, we have pushed very hard, and responsible culture, as I said, is at the core of what we do. In terms of luxury, it's fascinating how much more art and luxury are starting to intertwine. And again, from our perspective, the new buyers want that. The new collectors buy both luxury and art. The generations before probably collected either or. It's now more about acquisitive and what is it that passions for you. So for us, we try and combine them more. We try and look to them. And actually, we have both art and luxury are coming together in June, where Vivienne Westwood will be selling, or the late Vivienne Westwood will be selling some of her gowns, some of her beautiful jewellery, and some playing cards that she designed, sadly, in the last weeks of her life. And all of the proceeds of these sales will go to philanthropy, to culture, to Greenpeace, to causes that mattered to her.
I think what's so fascinating, and Christie's is one of the best examples, I think, of this interwoven nature of how you are telling stories, and also an add-on sort of mechanic or operational mechanic, whereby you not only have the auction, but for those who maybe are not directly transacting yet, I think that word yet is absolutely key here, not yet buying an auction, there is an exhibition sort of experience that you can go to, you know, anyone can visit those, can't they? They can all come and see those, and I think that piece around, as you mentioned, cause, this idea of cultural connection, and I know you've done something recently with Molly Goddard in the last couple of years, which tied into literature. You've worked with Dolce & Gabbana, with Gucci, and obviously with Vivienne, as you mentioned, coming up. And so we're starting to see this real proliferation of Gen Z. And Ekow, I wanted to ask you how you're seeing that shift change in the way that you're starting to curate as well. Are you starting to curate exhibitions slightly differently with this view of the wider experience in mind? Are you finding that's developing how you look at things?
I think that's a super interesting question. In that, look, I think an exhibition, let's say an exhibition in a museum, in a major museum, it actually fails if it's simply about the work on the walls in that space. The opportunity with an exhibition is to have a much more thought through, pervasive influence across an institution as a whole. So let's say, in fact, again, we can see one of the images up here right now. This is it's kind of part of the installation of my National Portrait Gallery show. The Time Is Always Now. In the process of making that show, I had all sorts of conversations across all layers, really, kind of different departments of the portrait gallery, about how are we going to show this work? What are the questions that arise from it? This is a show that brings together the work of artists of African diasporic, Black diasporic origin, internationally. How are we going to show this work? How are we going to speak of this work? And how can this, in a way, open space for the portrait gallery itself to look at its collection and to think about how it speaks of culture, diversity, identity, society into the future? So the opportunity with the show is not just about what happens in the moments that it is being shown, but how it in itself can also catalyze a broader conversation about the role of institutions in culture.
Mm-hmm. And I think we're starting, aren't we, Anthea, to see more and more this, I suppose, merging of commercial and institutional stories. And I think Venice Biennale was a really great example of that. We would have seen global brands. I'm sure everyone saw lots of different brands. I know Burberry was involved, obviously, in the pavilion, as was Christie's.
Yeah, well, as were we both, actually. We've just established it. Christie's sponsored the Nigerian pavilion and the British pavilion at the Biennale. We're the first auction house to do so. It's very, very conscious. We want to be part of the ecosystem, even if it's not commercial. But I've just discovered that Ekow also was part of the decision-making committee. So there we are. Art and life has truly come together on this stage. I think I would agree with you with the question of the art that we have is a reflection of the narratives of now. It's a reflection of the zeitgeist. And I think for that, one of the great fascinations for me of working in a business like ours is that we have these works that have been sold over the hundreds of years, and we are selling now. And again, our duty and our responsibility is to say what that means and what it should do. One of the images that you'll have here, oh, there is my game changer. Look, isn't it beautiful? Isn't it gorgeous? And you can see everyone's in masks because it really was COVID time. But somewhere else in here, you'll see an image of our building when we had it completely taken over by a British artist called Laquena McIver. Now, as I've said, we've been in that building a very long time, but last year, during Frieze Week, we invited an artist, a young, alive, wonderful artist, to come and take over the building. And it was very, very visually striking. You'll know it when you see it. But what we were saying was a message, is that we were saying the artist is in charge again. And we were saying this is what we are about. The beating heart of us is the artist. It was the first time it had ever happened in any of the Christie's buildings, so I took quite a deep breath before the first day of the unveiling, but I would say it was probably one of the most positive things I have ever witnessed in my 17 years.
I wanted to mention that you also placed that around the time there were key auctions taking place. And I wanted to actually mention in the room today, because I think it's such a vital piece of information that I wish I'd known when I was working global luxury, is auction weeks. It's really important, if you are working with a luxury brand, don't just look at the cultural calendar of Frieze and BAFTA and Fashion Week, which people so often do, and it's a bit tired. It's overexposed. You can't get cut through. There is something called auction weeks. It's when the auction houses put all of their significant auctions on, and that is when your highest level wealth market is in town, whether that be in London, New York, Hong Kong. That is what you should be considering if you are really wanting to look at wealth generation, next generations of wealth, and that's the smart way to start planning your brand activities. So that is something I really wanted to mention, because it's a real game changer if you can start punctuating in that way. And I wanted to mention also, there's this change we saw. There was one auction which Christie's did, which I'm sure lots of people, whether you're art world savvy or not, will have seen, where you raised 1.5 billion in one sale, which is mind-blowing. Can you talk to us about that?
Yeah, so that was the collection of Paul Allen, the late, great Paul Allen. So he collected the very best, and only the very best. So it wasn't many artworks, but it was the best. And he sold every single one in his will. It was delineated. Every single piece of that would go to philanthropic causes. Now, that was an astonishing wake-up moment, but actually for us in the business, we'd started to see it a few years before. The Rockefeller collection, which came up a few years before, was again a major American collection, was sold for philanthropic causes. And you're increasingly seeing, particularly in the States, where you have these enormous collections that come up, the view is far more to sell them for philanthropic causes than for anything else. Now, the impact, of course, is that the buyers are increasingly drawn to these sales. Again, leading with responsible culture, you are far more willing to go that little extra bit when you're bidding if you know that the funds are going somewhere good. Over here in Europe, we haven't quite got there. We haven't quite done the billion-dollar sales worth. But what we see more is individual works that are sold for philanthropic causes. My favorite, somewhere in this chain, is a beautiful painting that was sold by Tracy Emin 2 years ago called Like a Cloud of Blood. It was a very thoughtful, self-aware painting that she'd made when she was very unwell. And she sold it to raise money for the studios she was building in Margate for young artists. It made an extraordinary price. I think we estimated it for maybe £500,000 to £800,000, and it made £2.3 million. Absolutely fascinating. And I would say that a relatively similar work came up a few months later, not being sold by her, not being sold for philanthropic causes, and it made less. So right there, and you I think to me, you sum up what the buyer universe is at the moment in our business.
Well, I think there's something, isn't there, around this idea of cultural tourism, which Tracy, and I'm sure people have seen Margate, is coming to the fore a lot in terms of culture. And I think on the property market as well, it's a really clever way to make use of art in unusual ways, to place exhibitions, to deepen narratives around history, heritage, legacy, of enriching property development and experience. And I wanted to touch also on diversity. Obviously, we're talking as well about new waves of collecting, and an element of that is technology. But before we get onto that, Ekow, I wonder if we could talk about the fact that collecting is diversifying. Where do you think this new wave of opening up the art world, where did that come from? Where is it going? We're starting to see new markets emerging in these conversations. We were talking about some exciting trips and conversations earlier with your future projects. So can you talk to us about that?
I mean, look, none of these things stand still, do they? There's always movement, and one of, I would say, the significant movements, let's say within the last decade, we've seen a couple of things happening. One, we've seen kind of international embrace of black artists generally, let's say Kerry James Marshall in the US or Lynette Boakye in the UK. We've seen them become, and many others, we've seen them become internationally celebrated A-list artists. I mean, they're artists of extraordinary caliber anyway, but the art world and the art market has embraced them fully. But then also, we've also seen within that the rise of art from Africa, from the African continent, as well as the African diaspora, and that's been really fascinating. So I've been doing exhibitions in Ghana for the last couple of years. I'm about to do a show in Accra, the capital of Ghana, in fact, later this year in October, with the kind of leading Ghanaian gallery, Gallery 1957. But just one country has seen art stars like Amwaka Boafo, who has had an incredible trajectory over the last couple of years, kind of come to the fore.
He did the Dior partnership, right?
Yeah, he did a partnership with Dior a few years ago. It's really, really fascinating. The dynamism of one country, but also you see that in Nigeria, you see that to an extent in Kenya, you see that in South Africa, you see that in Zimbabwe. There's a real dynamism with the work. There's a real appetite from international audiences, from international buyers, from international museums. This sense that somewhere like Ghana now isn't somehow outside a conversation. It's part of an international conversation, and some of those artists are helping drive forward that conversation. So this kind of shift, we can call it diversification. Really what it is, it's actually everyone's trying to catch up with what's happening. The conversations are taking place. The issue is, can you hear them? Can you tune into them? Can you connect with them? And that's what people are trying to do in different places all at the same time right now.
And we were saying earlier, weren't we, because I sort of in a two-dimensional way said, Black Lives Matter really shifted. As you said, Black Lives Matter put a speed up on it, but it's actually been something that's been happening for well over, a decade, 15 years.
It's really important not to think that somehow this is a thing that's happening right now. No, this is actually about the work. The work is exceptional. People are looking at the work. Weirdly, or not weirdly, but like things like Instagram actually helped boost that enormously, because you can platform yourself as an artist more straightforwardly, but the work has to count. It has to be strong. Otherwise, that's when it becomes a flash in the pan. But we're not talking about a flash in the pan. We're talking about artists of consequence who are being embraced on an international stage right now.
And Anthea, you also, with the auction house, with Christie's, there's been a lot of incredible partnerships that play on this market specifically as well, haven't there? Yeah,
completely. And I couldn't agree with you more. This isn't a flash in the pan. This is a growing understanding and awareness, which has led to these extraordinary quality of artists being more visible. I think, to me, the best example in the commercial artwork is the art world is the 154 Art Fair. So it was an art fair that was started in 2013, if I'm correct. Yeah, and the name 154 refers to 54 countries that make up the African continent. And it started as a small art fair driven by this wonderful woman called Turia, and it now covers 3 cities and is a phenomenon in itself. It's absolutely extraordinary, and you know better than I do, Ekow, but I feel she has lent and understood her media medium so beautifully that it's cast an incredible light on this market and really opened it up for a lot of us. And then, of course, you see that reflected at auction. I mean, you know when you're there, when your buyers are asking for it, and certainly we do. We see some wonderful prices for Lynette and many of the other artists. We sold a collection called the Sina Gina collection, which was work by artists from Africa or the diaspora, and it made an extraordinary amount of money. I think it made £1.9 million, which is a lot of money for a market that is still just starting to grow. And I should say that all of that money went, again, back to philanthropic causes. You're sensing a theme here in a lot of what is going on right now. But I think the most obvious example of a buyer in this area, of course, is the famous Swizz Beatz, who has collected, I think, something like 1,000 works from a number of different artists from a number of different regions, and he's just launched an exhibition in Brooklyn Museum. And again, you probably know better than I, but his ethos is absolutely about working with artists, with artist estates, and giving back.
Yeah. It's so interesting. I went to the show a couple of weeks ago in New York, and I know when he started collecting, there was some sense of, well, is he doing this for what reasons? He's a hip hop artist. Him and his wife Alicia Keys, they're just there. But actually, no, you're right. 1,000 works. The show is a spectacular show. It's celebratory. It's really enjoyable. But it absolutely speaks to someone who has a deep commitment to that work. Yeah. And that lifts up the work. Right. And it also expands the audience and the engagement with that work.
Right. Absolutely right.
And you've heard it here first, so don't always just look straight to, there's obviously major fairs, art fairs that we all touch base with in London, but 154 is in London. There's Collect Art Fair. There's many more that you can look at doing brand activity and having rich and meaningful conversations. I'm really aware of time, because this could be a very long and in-depth conversation, but I'm going to try and have to cut some of our questions. One thing I wanted to mention on the diversity piece is 3 specific markets, so Ghana, Nigeria, and I think the third one, really important, Sierra Leone, if you haven't started looking at that market. And obviously next it's going to move towards South Asia, and you can see that starting to happen institutionally. If you look at what's happening in institutions, it usually leads the commercial space and then trickles down. And in terms of your customer behaviour, I think that's a key thing to look at. So in terms of the next generation collector, which we're all looking to, everyone in this room wants to talk to. We've obviously had a proliferation of new technologies. Anthea, how you're now speaking to a customer, or we are all speaking to a customer who is, I hate the word phygital, but they are. They're looking at communities, they want, everything. What are you looking to do over, let's say, the course of the next decade to have these conversations, or how have you already adapted to do that?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, the obvious point is digital. It's one of the single most obvious moves that we make. We are now 50% of our auctions are now online. But I think where you see your point very well made reflected in our buyers is digital art. Digital art, which of course famously burst onto the scene with us in 2019 when Beeple sold a digital work, a gentleman called Beeple, just so that you're clear, a digital work which was 5,000 images. And we put it on our website, and we didn't even put an estimate. We had no idea what we would make, and we didn't pretend to know. It made $69 million. Just take some time with that. That is how much money this piece of digital art made right there. Now, obviously, after that came a bit of a rise and a bit of an up and down, and people often ask me, is digital art here to stay? And my answer to your point is absolutely, because the artists and the buyers who are coming up behind have grown up in the digital generation. So it will inevitably be a medium that on some level they will respond to and want. So for us, one of the key ways that we lean in digitally is by giving them the art right in front of them that they're looking for.
And Ekow, how do you think your role may adapt or change with new technologies, whether that be planning exhibitions digitally? Will you have an AI assistant in the future?
I mean, look, I think the main thing is, whatever technology gives you access to audiences, it gives you an opportunity for insight, market insight, sometimes just engagement insight. At the heart of that, then, you're trying to think about, look, what is the work? What is the meaningful work? What is the work that has a connection? And then how do we engage with that? So for me, the technology is a way to get further, to get broader and wider, but also to get deeper.
Mm-hmm. And I wanted to close with both of you to ask you 2 questions. Who in the luxury space do you think is sort of doing art well or having these conversations well? And I'll start with that, actually.
I don't want to be embarrassing, but I think the National Portrait Gallery is doing it. It's not just because we're sharing a stage. I think that the reopening of the National Portrait Gallery was one of the defining moments for London and for the art world. They completely rewrote their collection. The National Portrait Gallery now has doors by Tracy Emin. And for all those things, if you take a look around it, you will see it as a reflection very much of our culture, and it is beautifully done. Do you agree?
I mean, actually, yes, I do.
Good,
I'm not unbiased, but I really do, because on an institutional level, it does what institutions are supposed to do, which is be of the moment and be for the people.
Right.
On a brand level, well, let's turn it back to you. I think Christie sponsoring the British Pavilion, the Nigerian Pavilion, I think is a really significant act. I think about other luxury brands that have been in the art space. I know Dunhill they host a series of talks now at Frieze.
Right.
I think those kind of engagements where you're speaking again with integrity, where those partnerships are clearly proper brand relationships.
Right.
Those are the things that I think are meaningful. Those are the things that I look at.
And I'm really aware that we're drawing to a close. So final question, and Charlotte, sorry, I'm going to go one question over. If people are listening to you thinking, wow, this all sounds amazing, how the hell do I access it? How do I even work with an auction house or a curator? How do people approach auction houses and curators?
Well, they walk through our door. We are open the whole time. We are open at 9 to 5 all the way through the week, and yet people are still very nervous to come in. There is still that perception of the kind of the elitism. So the way that whenever I speak to people, I say, please come in and have a cup of tea and walk around, and I will show you both the new art on the walls, but the archive downstairs, which has been there for over 250 years. So we are open, and it is my job, and it's certainly my vision, to make Christie's ever more open and ever more somewhere that anyone could come in and feel comfortable.
Yeah, these things aren't a mystery. I mean, look, I would say two things. One, they should talk to you, Katy, because you are a really, really fantastic connector across brands, across commerce, across culture, across art. Two, very serious when I say that. Two, actually, none of these things are super mysterious. Like, I would just, I work as a curator, I talk to people all the time, and part of the job is trying to be open to people. You don't always say yes or no to anything, because no one does. But the point is, those conversations are in themselves part of what moves culture forward. I'm quite happy if someone sends me a DM on Instagram. That's okay, because I'm interested in, okay, well, where are you? What's your perspective? Maybe there's something to share. But I think the whole point is, just trying to find ways to the conversation.
So new perspectives and new conversations, and it's been such a privilege to be in conversation with you both. You're doing epic work, so can we give a round of applause for both? Thank you.
I'll just quickly come and say goodbye. Do you want to come after? You don't have to sit there. Thank you, that was brilliant, Katy. That was fantastic, thank you so much. Great session, thank you. Right, well, that is it. So that was a brilliant session to end the day. We covered so much ground there, and I took lots and lots of notes again. And I love this kind of the thought about kind of responsible culture and lots to take away from that. So I'm not even going to try to summarise. I know we're probably all tired. We're probably desperately in need of our wonderful cocktails from 8 Lands. We've gone from the macro to the micro, from diversity to biodiversity, from China to the US to GCC. Strategy, delivery, insights on our established customers and our next-gen customers, and much more besides. You'll be relieved to know we have the post-summit report that our terrific writer Zoe has the enviable task of trying to write up and summarise. And if you complete the feedback survey, you also get free access to all the recordings as well. Please do the feedback. It's absolutely invaluable in how we think about the topics for next year, how we shape the conversations, how we, put more greater effort on the networking, for example. So please do share your thoughts. Our hope is that you're leaving today armed with 2 or 3 actionable insights that you can take back to your businesses and put into action tomorrow. That you've got a clear sense of what matters now and what is coming next, and that you've been inspired. I really, really hope that you've been inspired by what you've heard and you feel empowered to tackle some of those big challenges around nature and biodiversity and diversity as we heard about today. A huge thank you to all of our speakers, panellists and moderators. This programme just would not be possible without all of your time. A massive thanks to our partners, the wonderful Londoner for hosting us, McQueen's for the flowers, Wolf for the beautiful gifts, Focus team, who must be absolutely exhausted after the 3 a.m. Get-in, and also to Aitlands, who are kindly providing the cocktails this evening. To our bright and brilliant Walpole team, literally everybody plays a huge role in making today possible, and you are all absolutely brilliant, and probably all a bit tired too as well. Thank you for joining us. Thank you so much for your time. It's wonderful to have you here. A couple of just quick final housekeeping notes. Badges, if you could leave the badges, they will be recycled and reused. Also any of the brochures as well. We want to make the event as sustainable as possible, so please just do your part by leaving those with the team as well. So please do join us for some cocktails now. Thank you very much, and looking forward to chatting further over the next drinks. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us at the 2024 Walpole British Luxury Summit. Really hope you enjoyed the day and found the sessions valuable. Any questions, any feedback, please just drop us a line on rsvp@thewalpole.co.uk. And we're looking forward to seeing you again next year.